The red sun of Zilani Prime was dying, casting blood-colored shadows across the empty streets of what had once been the galaxy's most peaceful world. Commander Veltar stood on the observation deck of the evacuation center, his forearms pressed against the reinforced glass as he watched the final transport. Ships climbed desperately toward the stars. Each ship carried thousands of refugees from 7 different species that had lived together in harmony for over 1,000 years. The Zilani, with their graceful movements and silver skin, the rock-like Thurians, who spoke in musical tones, the tiny Pipari who could fly between the branches of the great crystal trees. All of them now homeless, all of them running from an enemy that showed no mercy. Commander called out Lieutenant Zexri from the communications station, her voice shaking with exhaustion. The distress beacon is ready. Signal strength is at maximum power. Veltar turned away from the window. In the distance, the black shapes of Vorth warships waited like patient predators. They had been there for 3 days, watching as the evacuation continued. They could have attacked at any time, but they preferred to let fear do their work first. The Vorth enjoyed watching entire civilizations crumble before they delivered the final blow. The universal distress call was ancient, older than most of the species in the galaxy. It had been created in the early days of space travel when civilizations first began to meet among the stars. The protocol was simple but sacred when a species faced complete extinction. They could broadcast their entire history, culture, and knowledge to anyone who would listen. It was a final gift to the universe, a way to ensure that something would survive even if they did not. In 3,000 years, only 2 species had ever used it. Both were now extinct. Veltar's hands shook as he approached the control panel. The beacon contained everything the Zilani Confederation had ever been. Their art, their music, their scientific discoveries, their philosophy of peace. It also contained their maps, showing the location of their last refuge on the Rimworlds, and most importantly, detailed records of every Vorth attack. The galaxy needed to know what the Vorth really were. They were not conquerors who wanted slaves or resources. They were not empire builders seeking to expand their territory. They were destroyers who killed for the simple joy of ending life. Every species they encountered faced the same fate, total extinction. "Broadcasting now, Commander," Zexri reported, her voice barely above a whisper. The message shot out from Zilani Prime at the speed of light, spreading across the galaxy like ripples on a pond, fanned civilizations with technology beyond imagination. Received the transmission within hours. Their quantum computers decoded the message instantly, translating the mathematical proofs and historical records with perfect accuracy. On the water world of Aquanis, the Council of Depths read the message and calculated the military cost of intervention. They chose to remain hidden in their deep ocean cities. The crystal beings of Luxor received the signal in their city of living light. Their elders debated for exactly 17 minutes before deciding that involvement would threaten their perfect society. They returned to their meditations. The Mechanic Collective, with their vast fleets of robot ships, processed the data and determined that biological species were statistically likely to become extinct anyway. They filed the message in their archives and continued building their machines. One by one, every advanced civilization in the galaxy made the same choice. They had their own worlds to protect, their own people to consider. The Zilani were strangers, and the Vorth were very far away. Someone else would surely help. But at the very edge of the galaxy, in a small spiral arm that most star maps ignored, something different happened. On a blue and green world orbiting a yellow sun, primitive radio. Telescopes pointed toward the stars detected an unusual signal. The planet's inhabitants had only recently learned to split the atom and had never traveled beyond their own moon. Their computers were crude mechanical things that filled entire rooms. Their fastest ships could barely reach the edge of their own solar system. Dr. Kim Woo was working the night shift at the radio telescope facility when the signal first appeared on his screens. At first, he thought it was interference from a satellite, but the pattern was too complex, too organized. Called his supervisor. Then his supervisor called the director, and within hours, the greatest minds on Earth were working to decode what they had received. The translation took days. The mathematics were unlike anything humans had ever seen. But slowly, piece by piece, the message began to make sense. Star charts showed the locations of destroyed worlds. Cultural databases revealed civilizations that had existed for millions of years. And at the center of it all was a desperate plea for help from species that had never hurt anyone. The leaders of Earth gathered in emergency session, generals and scientists, presidents and philosophers, all trying to understand what they had discovered. The message was clear. Somewhere in the galaxy, innocent people were dying, and no one was coming to save them. The choice should have been simple. Earth's technology was thousands of years behind even the most basic galactic civilizations. Their ships were slow, their weapons primitive, their armies small. By every logical measure, they had nothing to offer and everything to lose. But humans had never been particularly logical when it came to helping others. Dr. Kim Woo rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the computer. Screen again. The numbers dancing across his monitor made no sense, but they were definitely not random. For 6 hours, the signal had been coming from deep space. And now the translation computer was finally starting to understand what it meant. The control room smelled like coffee and sweat. 3 other scientists worked at nearby stations, all of them trying to decode the same mysterious transmission. Kim Woo had been studying space signals for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. "Bo Young," he whispered to the woman at the next desk. "Look at this." Dr. Lee Bo-young rolled her chair over and squinted at his screen. Her face went pale as she read the translated text. Mathematical formulas mixed with star charts and what looked like historical records. But these were not human records. "This is impossible," she breathed. "These are instructions for faster-than-light travel. Now look at these dates. Some of these civilizations are millions of years old." Kim Woo's hands trembled as he printed out the data. "Director Park needs to see this right now." Within an hour, Director Park Jin-soo was reading the translated message with growing amazement and horror. The transmission was not just a random signal from space. It was a complete archive of 7 different alien civilizations, sent out as their final act before extinction. The message told a terrible story. Species that had lived in peace for thousands of years were being hunted by something called the Fourth Hegemony. World after world had been destroyed, not conquered, but completely wiped clean of life. The aliens were not asking for money or weapons. They were begging for someone, anyone, to simply remember that they had existed. Park picked up his secure phone and called the president. President Carter sat in the Oval Office at 3 in the morning, listening to a story that sounded like science fiction. Around him, his top advisors whispered among themselves, trying to understand what they were hearing. "Mr. President said, Secretary of Defense Williams, we need to verify this information before we do anything. This could be an elaborate hoax." But Dr. Sarah Chen, the president's science advisor, shook her head. "The mathematics check out. The physics described in these documents is centuries ahead of our current understanding, but it all makes sense. No human could have created this." By dawn, copies of the alien message had been sent to every major government on Earth. The United Nations building in New York buzzed with activity as world leaders tried to understand what they had discovered in the main assembly hall. General Nam Tae-hyun stood before representatives from every nation on Earth. His uniform was crisp, but his face looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice carrying across the silent room. 24 hours ago, we learned that we are not alone in the universe. We also learned that innocent people are dying, and apparently, we are the only ones who care." He activated a large screen behind him, showing the translated star charts. Red dots marked destroyed worlds, while blue dots showed the locations of refugee fleets running for their lives. These species sent out their final message 6 months ago. In that time, 3 more worlds have gone silent. At the current rate of destruction, they will be extinct within a year. The Brazilian representative raised his hand. "General, with respect, what can we possibly do? Our most advanced spaceships can barely reach Mars. These aliens have technology we can only dream of." General Nam nodded grimly. "That is true. But we have something that apparently no other species in the galaxy possesses. We have the willingness to help strangers, even when it costs us everything. He clicked to the next slide, showing Earth's military capabilities. Our nuclear arsenals can be converted into ship-killing weapons. Our fusion drives, originally designed for Mars colonies, can be modified for interstellar travel. We have the technology to reach them. The Russian delegate laughed bitterly. Reach them and do what? Die heroically? This is madness. General Nam's eyes hardened. But throughout human history, we have always answered the call when innocent people needed help. We fought against slavery, against genocide, against tyranny, even when the odds were impossible. This is no different. The French representative stood up. But those were human conflicts. These are aliens. Why should we risk everything for creatures we have never met? Dr. Kim Woo, who had been invited to speak as the discoverer of the signal, stepped forward. His voice was quiet but clear, because they are crying for help and no one else is listening. The vote took 3 hours of debate. When it was finished, the result was unanimous. Every nation on Earth agreed to contribute to Project Thunder within days. Secret facilities around the world began working around the clock. Nuclear weapons were carefully dismantled and converted into massive bombs that could crack the hull of a spaceship. Fusion reactors built for power plants were modified to push spacecraft at incredible speeds. Every piece of advanced technology Earth possessed was redesigned for one purpose: war. The message went out to every human settlement, from research stations in Antarctica to colonies on the moon. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, and volunteers from every nation began returning. To Earth, they came by the thousands, all of them understanding that they might never see home again. Colonel Lee Min-ho stood in the hangar bay of the first completed warship, looking at the crews that would take humanity to the stars. They were teachers and farmers, students and grandparents, people who had never fired a shot in anger, but who could not ignore a cry for help. "We are probably going to die out there," he told them honestly. A young pilot named Kim Da-hai raised her hand. "Sir, with respect, people die every day at least. We will die for something that matters." The stars twisted and bent as Captain Lee Min-ho's small fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zilani space. The journey from Earth had taken 3 months, pushing their modified fusion drives to the breaking point. As the universe snapped back into normal view, Min-ho saw exactly what they had come to fight. 12 human ships hung in the darkness, their hulls scarred from the long journey across the galaxy. They were crude things compared to the sleek vessels fleeing before them. Earth's engineers had built them from spare parts and desperate hope, welding nuclear reactors to cargo haulers and strapping missiles to passenger ships. In the distance, hundreds of alien refugee ships scattered like frightened birds. Some were massive colony vessels carrying entire cities. Others were tiny fighters barely large enough for a single family. All of them were running from the dark shapes that prowled the edge of the system like hungry wolves. "Sir," Lieutenant OG-1 called from her station, her voice tight with tension. "I'm reading massive energy signatures from those black ships. They're bigger than anything in our databases." Min-ho studied the tactical display with growing understanding. The Vorth ships were not just larger than human vessels. They were impossibly huge, each one the size of a small city. Their weapons could probably destroy entire planets, and their armor looked thick enough to stop anything Earth could throw at them. "Sir," Ogi-wan said again, "we're receiving a transmission from one of the refugee ships." The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of an alien unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Commander Veltar had silver skin that seemed to glow with its own light, and for arms that moved with liquid grace. His large eyes held a mixture of desperate hope and growing confusion. "Unknown vessels," Veltar said, his voice translated by the ship's computer. "Identify yourselves immediately." "Yes." "This system is under Vorth occupation. You must leave at once for your own safety." Min-ho stepped forward, his military uniform neat despite the long journey. Behind him, his bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, preparing for what everyone knew would probably be their last battle. Commander Veltar, Min-ho said calmly, "I am Captain Lee Min-ho of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your distress call 6 months ago." Veltar's forearms moved in what might have been surprise or confusion. Terran, I do not know this species. Your ships. They appear to be very primitive. Surely you cannot intend to engage the Vorth fleet with such limited technology? Minho smiled, and for a moment his face looked much older than his 35 years. Commander, you sent out a call for help. We're here to answer it. Do not understand, Veltar said urgently. The Vorth have conquered half the galaxy. Their ships carry weapons that can crack moons. Their armor can withstand the fury of a star. How can your tiny fleet possibly make a difference? We'll find a way, Minho replied simply. At the edge of the system, Vorth sensors had detected the arrival of the human ships. Deep inside the command center of the flagship, Overlord Grixith studied the readings with mild interest. The newcomers registered as primitive, their technology centuries, behind even the weakest species the Vorth had encountered. Shall we destroy them, Overlord? Asked his tactical officer. Grix waved a dismissive claw. Ignore them. They're not worth the energy it would take to fire our weapons. Continue the advance on the refugee fleet. We will deal with these primitives. After we finish exterminating the Zilani, the massive Vorth dreadnoughts began moving forward with mechanical precision. Each ship was a masterpiece of destruction, built over centuries to perfect the art of ending entire civilizations. Their crews had wiped out hundreds of species, and they approached this battle with the same cold efficiency they brought to every extermination. They had never encountered humans before. 6 hours later, space twisted again as Admiral Park Sungmin's reinforcement fleet emerged from hyperspace. 50 more human ships appeared in a burst of light, their hulls gleaming with fresh paint and determination. These were the best Earth had to offer, crewed by volunteers from every nation and carrying enough nuclear weapons to turn a small moon into dust. Admiral reported Captain Yoon Haijin from the destroyer Inchin. All ships report. Ready for combat? Crews are at battle stations. Park studied the tactical display from his flagship, the carrier Sol. The Vorth fleet was enormous, easily outnumbering the humans 10-1. Each enemy ship carried more firepower than Earth's entire nuclear arsenal. By every measure of military logic, this battle was already lost. Sir, his communications officer said, we're receiving messages from the second and third waves. They'll be here within the hour. Park nodded grimly. More human ships were coming, wave after wave of volunteers, who had crossed the void to answer a stranger's cry for help. Teachers and farmers, students and grandparents, people who had never wanted to be soldiers, but could not ignore the call of those in need. Commander, Veltar watched from his refugee ship as more human vessels continued to arrive. Each wave brought ships that looked even more improvised than the last. Some were clearly converted cargo haulers. Others appeared to be passenger liners with weapons bolted to their hulls. All of them moved with the same quiet determination. They're going to die, whispered his tactical officer. Veltar's forearms trembled as he watched the primitive human fleet form up for battle. Yes, he said softly. But they came anyway. The first shot of the Battle of Zilani Station came. At dawn, ship time. The massive Vorth dreadnought Deathbringer fired a beam of pure energy that could have melted a city in seconds. The target was Captain Lee Minho's flagship, converted cargo hauler that looked like a toy compared to the mountain-sized enemy vessel. The beam missed by mere meters as Minho threw his ship into a desperate roll. The energy passed so close that the hull plates glowed red-hot, but the ship survived. On the bridge, alarms screamed as his crew fought to keep their primitive systems working. All ships, Minho broadcast to his fleet, remember what we came here to do. Those people are counting on us. Overlord Grixith watched from his command center with growing annoyance. The humans should have surrendered after that first shot. Every other species in the galaxy understood the message when the Vorth showed their power. But these strange creatures from the edge of space seemed completely unafraid of death. Fire again, he ordered. Destroy them all and be done with it. What happened next had never occurred in 3,000 years of Vorth conquest, Captain. Yoon Hajin's destroyer Inchin was caught in the crossfire between two Vorth cruisers. Her ship was badly damaged, engines failing, weapons offline. Any rational commander would have ordered evacuation or surrender. Instead, Hyjin did something that shocked both friend and enemy. "All hands, prepare for ramming speed," she announced. Over the ship's intercom, her voice was calm, almost cheerful. "It has been an honor serving with all of you." The Ancient's fusion drive roared to life one final time, pushing the little destroyer directly toward the nearest fourth cruiser. The enemy tried to shoot her down, but she was too close and moving too fast. The collision created a ball of nuclear fire that consumed not just the destroyer, but 3 Vorth ships that had been unlucky enough to be nearby. As the flames faded, Hyjin's final message echoed across all radio frequencies: "For Earth and freedom." Grixith stared at his tactical display in disbelief. One of his cruisers simply gone, destroyed by a ship a tenth its size. The human captain had killed herself and her entire crew just to damage his fleet. It made no sense. "Overlord," his tactical officer reported, "the humans are not following standard battle patterns. They appear to be targeting our ships for ramming attacks." "That's impossible," Grixith snapped. "No species is that insane." But even as he spoke, another human ship was diving toward his formation, its hull glowing from weapon hits but still accelerating. The converted passenger liner Sol broke apart under enemy fire, but its pieces continued forward, slamming into a Vorth destroyer and crippling its engines. Commander Veltar watched the battle from his refugee ship, his 4 hearts beating so fast he thought they might burst. The human fleet was being torn apart by superior Vorth firepower, but they kept fighting with a fury he had never seen before. "They're not trying to win," he whispered to his tactical officer. "They're trying to save us. Humans were fighting like no species in galactic history. When their ships were damaged, they used them as weapons. When their guns ran out of ammunition, they rammed enemy vessels. When they were outnumbered, they attacked with even greater determination." Major Kim Hai led her fighter squadron in what should have been a suicide mission against the Vorth flagship. Her tiny ships carried nuclear bombs that had been jury-rigged from old warheads, and she intended to deliver them personally. "Phoenix Squadron," she broadcast to her pilots, "remember why we're here. Those people down there are depending on us. No retreat, no surrender." Her fighters dove through a storm of enemy fire, half of them exploding before they reached their target. But the survivors kept coming, their war cry echoing across the comm channels as they crashed into the massive dreadnoughts. The nuclear explosions that followed cracked the Vorth flagship's hull in a dozen places, venting atmosphere and crew into space. For the first time in centuries, a Vorth command ship was in real danger. Colonel Han Subin's marine assault teams boarded damaged Vorth vessels with a mission that confused the enemy even more. They were not trying to capture the ships or steal technology. They were making sure that none of the Vorth crew survived to report back to their commanders. "No witnesses," Subin told his teams as they fought through the alien corridors. "If they don't know how we fight, they can't prepare for us." The boarding parties fought with savage determination, using primitive weapons and hand grenades against enemies with advanced armor and energy weapons. They took heavy casualties, but they accomplished their mission. Every Vorth ship they boarded was left as a drifting tomb. The battle raged for 14 hours. Human ships continued to arrive in waves, each one filled with volunteers who knew they were probably going to die. They came anyway, because somewhere in the darkness, innocent people were calling for help. By the end, the Vorth fleet was scattered, wreckage floating in space. Overlord Grixith's flagship limped away with half its crew dead and its engines barely working. Behind him, dozens of other Vorth ships fled in panic, carrying reports of an enemy that fought like demons. The humans had lost half their fleet, but they had done something impossible. They had broken the Vorth hegemony's reputation for invincibility. For the first time in galactic history, the great destroyers had been forced to retreat. Commander Veltar stared at the battlefield in amazement. These strange humans from the edge of space had crossed the galaxy to save people they had never met. They had faced impossible odds, and somehow won. The thunder had broken across the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the Battle of Zalani Station, Kita Morel Park Seung-min stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the last Vorth stronghold burn. The massive fortress that had once controlled a dozen star systems was now a broken shell, its weapons silent and its crew fled or dead. Park's face bore new scars from the long campaign. A piece of shrapnel had cut across his left cheek during the Battle of Korth Prime. Burns on his hands came from a fire aboard his ship when they fought at the Twin Suns, but his eyes still held the same quiet determination that had brought humanity across the galaxy. Admiral reported Captain Kim Min-jin from the communications station. All Vorth resistance in this sector has ended. The survivors are requesting permission to surrender. Out. Park nodded slowly. The Vorth hegemony, which had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years, was finished. Their empire had crumbled, not because of superior technology or greater numbers, but because they had finally met an enemy that refused to be afraid. Commander Veltar stood beside the Admiral, his arms trembling as he tried to understand what he had witnessed. The Zilani commander had followed the human fleet through 6 months of impossible battles, watching these strange beings from Earth fight with a courage that defied all logic. Your species sacrificed everything for people you had never met, Veltar said, his translated voice filled with wonder. Thousands of your ships destroyed, hundreds of thousands of your people dead. We cannot possibly repay such a debt. Park turned to face the alien commander, and his scarred face showed the gentlest of smiles. Commander, we didn't do this because we wanted payment. We did it because it was the right thing to do. Veltar's large eyes seemed to glow with emotion. In all his years of studying galactic civilizations, he had never encountered a species like humanity. Every other race in the galaxy calculated costs and benefits before taking action. Only humans seemed willing to sacrifice everything for strangers. But why? Veltar asked. What drives your people to such extremes? Park looked out at the stars, remembering the long journey from Earth. On our world, we have an old saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We heard your cry for help, and we could not do nothing. As the human fleets prepared for their long journey home to Earth, something extraordinary began to happen. Ships started appearing from hyperspace, but these were not enemies. They were vessels from species that had remained hidden during the Zilani's darkest hour. The crystal beings of Luxor arrived first, their ships gleaming like living jewels. For 3,000 years they had hidden in their perfect cities, afraid to dirty themselves with the galaxy's problems. But humanity's example had shamed them into action. We offer our technology and our friendship, announced their spokesman. A creature of pure light should have answered the call for help, but we were cowards. Humanity has shown us what courage truly means. The water dwellers of Aquanus came next, emerging from their deep ocean worlds for the first time in centuries. Behind them came the Mechanic Collective, their robot ships carrying offers of advanced weapons and faster-than-light drives. We wish to join this alliance, transmitted the Collective's leader. We have calculated that a galaxy where the strong protect the weak is statistically more stable than one ruled by fear. Species after species arrived, each one offering aid and friendship to the humans who had crossed the void to answer a stranger's cry for help. The galaxy had heard Earth's thunder, and it had changed everything. On Earth, Dr. Kim Woo sat in his small apartment and watched the diplomatic meetings on television. He was an old man now, his hair white and his hands shaky. But his eyes still held the same curiosity that had led him to detect the first alien signal. The news reporters called him a hero, the man who had discovered that humanity was not alone in the universe. But Kim Woo knew the real heroes were the ones who had not come home. Captain Yoon Hejin, who had rammed her ship into 3 enemy vessels. Major Kim Dae-hai, who had led the fighter attack that crippled the Vorth flagship. Colonel Han Su-ben, whose Marines had fought hand-to-hand in the corridors of alien warships. All of them had died so that strangers could live. The television showed President Carter signing treaties with dozens of alien species. Earth a small. The blue world that had once listened desperately for signs of life among the stars was now the center of a new galactic alliance. But this alliance was different from anything the galaxy had ever seen before. It was not built on trade agreements or military pacts. It was founded on a simple idea that humanity had brought to the stars, that the strong had a duty to protect the weak, that when innocent people cried out for help, someone should answer. Kim Woo smiled as he watched alien ambassadors shake hands with human diplomats. The Zilani had sent their desperate message into the void, hoping that someone, somewhere, would care enough to help. Most of the galaxy had chosen silence and safety, but Earth had thundered back across the darkness, and that thunder still echoed among the stars. The universe now knew that there was a species called humanity, and that they would never stand silent when innocence called for help. In the years that followed, when other species faced extinction or oppression, they would remember the lesson of Zilani Station. They would remember that somewhere in the galaxy, there were people who believed that doing the right thing was more important than staying safe. The thunder had spoken, and the galaxy had listened.